Barbers of Reddit, what was your oh shit moment? While I was training at a pretty chic salon in London, there was a kid who came in for a cut with his mum. She was a regular, the typical bi-weekly blowdry client that was always dressed in the finest fineries and sent her kid to private school. He sat down in my colleague's chair and the mum gave a fairly detailed and particular instruction of a short back and sides, as if my colleague had never heard of a haircut before. She then sat down in the waiting area and picked up a magazine and began reading. This kid was a little shit. He squirmed and complained the entire time. My colleague, bless her, was very diplomatic and tried to be firm, but fair to this kid, she was very experienced at this point and dealt with a fair share of spoilt kids. Towards the end of the cut, she very clearly told the boy to stay still as she was cutting the stray hairs around his ears. She told him that her scissors had just been sharpened and would hurt a lot if she cut him. He agreed to keep his head still. However, as previously stated, this boy was a little shit. He suddenly turned his head to something and she caught the top of his ear. Now, she wasn't lying about getting her scissors sharpened, and those things are hella sharp when they are. I will never forget the top bit of his ear just resting on the blades of her scissors and her wide-eyed pale expression of realization of what had happened. I don't know if you've ever cut an ear, but those things bleed. At this point, the mother put down her magazine, put her thunder face on, and stormed over to my colleague's section with the screaming and bleeding child in it. Wordless, she raised her arm with an open hand and slapped the kid straight in the face. That'll teach you for not listening. The whole salon was in complete shock. She pulled him up by the arm and dragged him out of the salon without a word to anyone else. We never saw them again. Absolutely, the most mental experience of working in a salon. That, and the crazy color change I had to do, but that is a story for another time. I was in school still at the time and was cutting this guy's hair. He brought his girlfriend along, and she was watching like a hawk over me. I'm halfway through the cut and almost done with the fade when the person next to me has their trolley too close to me, so I go to move it, but I didn't pay attention that my other hand had the clipper still running with no guard on. I made a nasty line through the fade that didn't look intentional at all and was sweating my ass off on how I was gonna fix this. The girlfriend of course points it out, and the client is actually super chill about it and has me basically just run a super high 0.5 on the sides and back. 3 years later and to this day I haven't had an incident that bad. Barber here. I'm pretty experienced and a successful barber with my own place, but I definitely made some mistakes along the way. This story still makes me die inside a little. When I was training, maybe a few months in, so I had a bit of confidence, enough for me to not realize I still didn't know what I was doing. I was cutting this guy's hair and I got to his fringe. He wanted it really short and I was standing in front of him cutting along his forehead whilst chatting away. I took my scissors away to comb his hair but flicked them around my fingers and they swung round and hit the guy right in the fucking iris. I froze. He froze. Eventually I asked, did I just hit you in the eye by the way? He said I think so. Trying to act like it wasn't sore for some reason. It eventually blew up in the shop once his shock wore off and someone else got him out the door. Found out a month later his wife was a nurse and she used some kind of eye drop and his eye was only scratched. Thank God, because I thought I blinded him. I gave him a free haircut next time. Just a one though. I've got a few stories. Started combing a guy's hair to get ready to cut it. Shifted the comb over the left side of his head and the hair did not move the way it was supposed to. I pulled the comb down again and realized the dude did not have a left ear. Didn't say anything about it. Gave him a cut that still worked with it and he left happy. Had a blind man come in once who said that this haircut was his first stop after getting out of a 25-year prison sentence for murdering his wife. Gave his name and everything. We looked him up and he did indeed murder his wife who was also blind. During barber school I was the most eager to learn to straight razor shave of all the customers, so the instructor gave me all the hardest shaves, including an 80-year-old dude whose skin was so loose and unhealthy that each time I pulled the blade over his flesh, it brought up just as much dead skin as it did hair. I wasn't cutting him or anything, he just had that much dead skin just chillin' on his face every other week. Had a mom bring in her son, about 8 years old, with beautiful long hair. Told me to shave it all off as short as we could go, which is a big red flag. Being still in school, I missed the warning signs and buzzed up the back of his head in time to see a bug as long as my thumbnail scurry back into where the hair was long. I inspected more closely and found several bugs of similar size. My instructor chewed out the mother very harshly. I suppose these aren't really oh shit moments in the way that you might have meant it, but I've got a lot of stories. Not seeing a lot of actual barbers in this thread, because probably a lot of these sort of stories will make you look like a bad barber, but oh well. Here's a collection of my oh shit stories from my 8 years in the industry. Beauty school. This tweaker dude and his hippie girlfriend come in for $7 haircuts. Immediately, something seemed off about the girlfriend. She seemed a little not all there and was cross-eyed and had dreads poking out of her hippie hat. The appointments were a bit staggered, so I finished the guy's one all-over buzz cut and my classmate calls me over to help with hers. When she took off the girl's hat, her hair was completely matted and filthy, and beneath the matted hair were stinking, suppurating sores covering her scalp. When we combed at the hair, her scalp would begin to give and split away wetly. We called over an instructor who tried to explain that we couldn't service someone who was literally oozing. She didn't seem to understand and they left without paying. I'll never forget that smell. Also beauty school, when bang trims go poorly. If you cut even slightly too high and a cowlick in the front goes boing and springs the hair right up off the face. There's literally no coming back from a bad bang trim. To be fair, if it was that important, she shouldn't have been having students doing it. This also applies to colors. Local teenage girls would come in expecting a full head of highlights and then be shocked and angry when it goes poorly and takes forever and there's huge lines near the root. Arguments between 17-year-old clients and 19-year-old jailbird beauty school girls were really common. Lice. I've had 3 run-ins with lice on kids in my 8 years of cutting hair. You just have to stop cutting immediately, discreetly send them back to their parents, and spend the next hour cleaning and feeling crawly. Discovering something like lice is like the classic oh shit moment in haircutting. Years ago, I was working at a shop in SF's Tenderloin. I was standing near the window looking absent-mindedly outside. This drugged-out woman on the corner decides that I was looking at her, so she shambles into the shop right up to the station and starts threatening me, inches from my face. I become acutely aware that my razors and shears are sitting in plain view on the counter next to us and that I have to get them into my possession and away from her before she can use them against me. I decided that if I'd have to stab a crackhead in self-defense, I'd use my trusty 8-inchers. Before it gets to that, my coworkers intervene and begin corraling her outside. At the doorway she starts swinging, punches one coworker in the face, and bites the other on the chest. Cops showed up pretty quick and arrested her about a block away. I spent another year at that shop constantly looking over my shoulder, certain that she'd one day reappear. Once had a dude pass out after a haircut. Based on what he told me, he had some sort of sensory issues, and the combination of heat, the neck strip, clipper buzzing and noise of the shop overwhelmed him. If you've ever dealt with a person fainting, you know what an oh shit moment it is. 1 minute dude is standing up and looking a little worried, next he is crumpling to the floor. I'm a little guy, but I was able to sort of catch him and ease him down without anyone getting hurt. It was pretty scary. My first thought was that I somehow killed him. And my personal worst story. I was cutting one of my regulars' hair, and he always insisted on scissor over comb instead of clippers on the side, which is fine and kind of my thing anyhow. I was working in the lower right corner of his nape moving upwards with my biggest 8-inch dry cutting scissors, and he sorta twisted toward me to say something at the precise moment my shears closed, causing me to close the pivot of my shears right onto the flesh atop of his ear. It wasn't like a little common nick, I felt my tools puncture living flesh. The whole top chunk was like hanging off and bleeding profusely. My coworkers said I looked pale and panicked, and I still don't know how I did it, but I managed to get the ear chunk back in place with surgical glue and staunch the bleeding with talcum powder. The craziest part is he kept coming to see me, insisted on paying full price plus tip, and continued coming back up until he moved away a year later. About 5 years later, not a day goes by at work where I don't think about the sickening sensation of metal on flesh, and I'm happy to say nobody has been hurt since. I see barbers haven't completely given up on doing surgery as a side gig. Not me, but my mom, who is a hairdresser. Did you know that some hair dye chemicals don't play well together? Turns out the lady had used some sort of home hair dye chemical that basically has tiny bits of metal in it. She didn't mention. My mom goes to dye her hair and puts the professional dye on it. And the hair more or less starts melting as the dye reacts. Her hair was totally ruined, there was no saving it. Only thing to do was to just get the new dye off as fast as possible. She was pretty understanding about the whole situation though. Also a stylist, but this reminds me of a story from one of my instructors. Lady comes into the school and wants highlights, I think. Or it might have been a color remover actually, now that I'm really thinking of it. Box color black, wants to be lighter is the short of it, I suppose. Now this particular instructor has been teaching for like 20 plus years and she insists on doing a strand test. They take a bit of hair, put the color remover on it in a foil. And it starts smoking. Like immediately. They open the foil and the hair is white in like a minute, but also fried beyond repair. Chemical reactions are wild. My coworker at a salon was cutting a girl's hair and found lice. The girl's mom had left her for the trim, and she had to wait for her mom in the lobby. We spent the next hour or so frantically cleaning around all of the other clients and stylists to sanitize the whole place top to bottom. When the mom came back and asked her why she didn't have her hair cut, she replied they found out. Who brings their lice-ridden child to the salon? When my mom worked at Perfect Look, she says the lice was pretty much constant. So many lice kids. But she was told she wasn't legally allowed to say your kid has lice, since that's technically a diagnosis. She was supposed to say something like, "We've found something that appears like it may be lice," or something like that. Lots of the parents super did not care. The barber my dad took us kids to growing up kept a plastic ear in a big glass jar of water. Told all the little kids, jokingly, that it was the ear of a little boy who wouldn't be still when getting a haircut, and he accidentally cut this kid's ear off. Said he was keeping it in formaldehyde to remind us all to be very still. It largely had the desired effect on the younger kids. Some kids just won't listen to hold still, or I'll cut off your ear might as well show 'em. Oh geez. I've been barbering for 7 years and I've got a couple stories. Mostly communication errors. I had a client come in with a super tight haircut, looked like it had just been cut, and asked for a 0 on the sides. I'm not sure what this guy was on, but a 0 is bald to me. So I start my bald line for my fade, and he freaks out that it's way too short and I ruined his haircut. Since this never happens to me, I got super upset and felt absolutely terrible. I've had clients who text me and ask for an appointment, and then I forget to book it, then they show up, and I'm busy, and they don't have an appointment. I always comp them because I feel terrible. I used to work in a low-income neighborhood and worked at a black barbershop. I was cutting a kid's hair, and since it was so curly you couldn't see his scalp or anything. Started cutting into it and sure enough, he had ringworm. I have hella stories, but those are just the ones that come to mind. 0 is bald. What did the guy think he was asking for? I used to get a full buzz, and I used to ask for an 8 on top, longest, and 4 on the sides. I remember one time, I was at Supercuts and asked for that, and they turned to another cutter and asked which garden number 8 was, and they said 000, I think, it was a long time ago. It was expressed in zeros, though. I got the right cut. There must be a couple different systems for measuring guards. Since I upped my hair game, I don't ask for a guard anymore, I just say scissor cut on top to a little more than an inch, just a little longer in the front than in the back, then a little on top, and buzz fade the sides down to the length of my sideburns. I trim my beard before I get my haircut. It's better to describe what you're looking for than it is to ask for something as specific as a guard length to prevent confusion. Brother of a barber who used to be a hair model? Back when I used to have a good head of hair. His instructor told a story during one of the shows about a mobster falling asleep during a shave. While shaving him, he accidentally cut off a mole. He said he kept on putting towels on him and then snuck across the street and hid in a bar watching through the window until the mobster left. Since he was only renting the chair in the shop, he grabbed all his stuff and found another place to work after he was sure the mobster was gone. My mom was cutting my hair when I was younger, around 2nd grade. She was only using the razor at one point, without the thing that makes it a certain length, towards the end. A piece of hair fell on my nose and made me sneeze, my head moved, and I ended up with a bald spot. I ended up having to get shaved completely bald to fix it, and she refused to give haircuts after that, except for one time during COVID. Lol. Mom of a 6-year-old here. I recently started cutting his hair again due to COVID. I am not a hairstylist by any means. Same thing, I would tell him not to move and go to do some cleanup on the edges when suddenly he'd just be like, "What's that over there?" With no warning. His hair came out much shorter than I would have liked. But I guess it could have been worse. Not a barber, but my cousin worked in a salon when I was a kid, and I would hang out there a lot after school. One day she cut a guy's head pretty bad with the clippers. Lots of blood, but it wasn't too serious. This led to them dating and eventually getting married. So what you're saying is, she fucked up so bad she also fucked him. My dad let me line myself up once. Fucked up. Decided to cut the whole thing off and go bald. The plus side to being black is that 99% of the time being bald looks fine. I guess I was part of the 1% that looks like a fucking Whopper malt ball. The typical not a barber here, but I used to go to a local barber college to get my hair cut because it was cheap. One girl had never cut a white guy's hair, and her teacher asked if I was okay with it. I said sure, she has to learn somehow and it's just hair, it can be shaved and should grow back. Told her how I wanted the haircut, pretty simple, a little short and off the ears. Jokingly said do not take my ears off. Long story short, I left with a bald head and a band-aid on the top of my left ear after bleeding like a stuck pig due to blood thinners. Where she nicked me with the scissors. Even her teacher couldn't save the haircut. I did my best to try and help the girl calm down as she was ugly crying. Went back a month later and asked if the girl was there. Thankfully she was, and I simply smiled and said town too. She did it perfect second time around. Honestly, I think you going back and asking for her probably helped her a lot. She was a little more confident. I just want to make sure she was okay and still working towards what she wanted. I mean, hell, who hasn't fucked up when first learning? Licensed cosmetologist here. During my very first men's haircut when I was in school, I accidentally cut this guy's skin tag off. I was absolutely horrified, but he was super nice about it and was genuinely stoked. He only had to pay $5 plus a tip to get it removed. That's the only real oh shit moment that's been my fault that I can think of. I've had plenty, if not too many what the fuck moments though. I've had people shit, piss, shit and piss, vomit, come in with cum, shit, mold, blood and other fun fluids in their hair. Be high or drunk out of their minds. Get violent with me. Sexually harass, assault me. And more in my chair. Please be nice to the person who does your hair, we go through too much to make y'all look nice. My entire life. My last name is Barber. I'm not a licensed barber or professional by any means, but I have been cutting my own hair for about 10 years. I'm really good at it, save a lot of time and money, know exactly how to do it, and never have to worry about getting something I don't like anymore. But it has taken a lot of trial and error over the years. Especially when I was learning how to fade. This was 3 years ago. I start cutting like I normally do and start fading my sides. At the top on my head the guard pops off, huge fucking chunk falls down my face. So me, still learning, not knowing how to fix it, decides it's best to just buzz it. Which I've really only had to do 3 times in my career. I look dumb as shit with a buzzed head, so for some unknown reason, I also decide to shave my beard, thinking maybe it'll equal it all out. Nope. Apologies if this offends anyone, but I look like I'm receiving chemo at this point. Bro, I look like a thumb. Big toe looking ass. So I hated myself. My wife still makes fun of me to this day. I got endless shit from my family and was attached to a hat for like 2 months. This was the moment that made me never fuck up again. Thumb from Spy Kids looking ass. Don't worry, a lot of us have gone too far and accidentally ended up looking like a potato. Not a barber, but when I was waiting for my turn to get cut, one of the barbers stopped cutting another guy and ran to the toilet. Guess it was literally an oh shit moment. I got seated with another barber, thankfully. When I was a little kid and hid under the table with a pair of scissors to cut my own bangs. My mom screamed when she saw my work. I remember doing it by feel, didn't even have a mirror, but I don't remember how it looked. Ironically, a few years later my mom tried to trim my bangs and she did a horrible job. I had to wear a hat for a while. I'm not a barber, but one time my mom cut my ear with the hair clippers and she freaked out whilst I was sat there wondering what the hell was going on until she shouted, "Get a tissue, we have blood loss XD." I went to a barbershop where the barbers spoke very little English and somehow there was some sort of communication error between us and he ended up shaving my sideburns up to the top of my ear. Ugh. My mother is a barber. She was tasked with cutting my husband's hair for our wedding. The guard comb thing that goes on electric razor popped off while she was enthusiastically talking to me. She accidentally buzzed a zero on the back of his head. A zero is the shortest you can cut the hair without it being bald, I believe. We never told him and no pictures were taken of the back of his head. If I can help it, I'll be taking this to my grave. If not, he'll forgive me, but I'll feel bad still. Why did I read this thread before lunch, damn it. Poor Gary though. Rest his soul. Been a professional barber for 2 years now. I like to tell my clients this story all the time, but it is the first time writing it, so bear with me. When I was in barber school, I had a mother and her son come in to get a haircut for her son. They did not speak English very well, so there was a bit of a language barrier. She told me she wanted a 2 on top, which is very short, 1/4 inch left to be exact, and the little boy had close to 3 inches on top, so I figured they did not understand the lengths. I did try to explain to her that the 2 would be very short by showing her the guard, but she insisted he got a 2 on top. Being the dumbass I was, I started my clipper down the middle of the kid's head. I remember hearing the clipper take off a bunch of hair, and the child knew something was wrong and starting screaming. Oh shit. The mother came over and scolded me for taking it too short. She told me that she meant she wanted 2 inches left, not a number 2 guard. I apologized like 5 times and told them that I would at least make the buzz cut look good and get them a free haircut next time. As I was finishing up the kid's hair, literally on the last pass with my clippers, by an act of God or something, the guard I was using popped off, and I went straight to skin down the middle of the top of this poor child's head. I put my hand over the bald patch on this kid's head and just pretended that nothing had happened. Thankfully, one of my instructors came by and I was able to flag him down for some assistance. I took my hand off the kid's head and my instructor started chucking and told me to go in the back and get some water while he sorts this out. He ended up getting in a big fight with the mother because she thought I did it on purpose for yelling at me earlier, but it wasn't accidentally, and she did come to a school and pay $5 for a student haircut. TLDR, took a child's hair way too short. Tried to make it look good. Went even shorter than I already had an accident. Hide in back while instructor argues with mother about whether or not I did it on purpose. Barber here. I had a client who came in that I hadn't seen in about 2 years. He was an older gentleman that used to come in once every couple months, but he just stopped after his wife passed away. Anyways, I guess his family put him in a home after she died and they did haircuts or something in there. I don't know, I didn't have enough time to figure it out. But his caretakers brought him in for some reason, dropped him off, and said they'd be back in a couple hours. Personally, I thought it was a dickish thing to do, but I always liked Gary, and it was cool to see him again. He smelled terrible, though, and all the color in his eyes was gone. His skin seemed really, God, I don't know, crispy? You could almost hear his skin crackle and pop when he moved his disgusting arms and legs. Gary wasn't even chatty like he used to be, but I figured he was depressed since his wife died, his kids abandoned him, and he smelled like bags of trash from a Chinese restaurant. Whatever. But the whole time he was waiting, he was wearing a baseball cap. Pirates or something, I dunno. I don't follow teams. Dude sits down and he mumbles some shit about his haircut. And I'm all like, Gary, it's going to be alright, no big deal, let's get this hat off and I'll give you a trim on the house. Let's get you good. When I took Gary's cap off, there was a lot of resistance, I guess. The cap didn't come off easily is what I'm trying to say. I had to actually use both my hands to get that sucker off. So I lift the cap off with both my hands and I'm gripping the bill so tightly I hear a small pop. Dude had the cap on tight, right? Even weirder, some bits of Gary's hair came up with the hat. It's starting to fall out now, big guy? I asked. Gary mumbled a response. I put his hat down on the counter and went to work. Or would have, because that's when I noticed that Gary had a huge rash on his head where his hair should have been. And even worse? The rash was moving. It was fucking wiggling, even. I was scared as shit and leaned in. Oh no. I went back to his hat and saw that some of Gary's hair in the hat was moving as well. A little bit of vomit came up from my stomach and I told him we would have to do the haircut another day. The caretakers told me that they didn't know how long Gary had maggots in his head, but he only lived for a couple more months. Alright, WTF, I was not ready. I was ready for everything from Loch Ness Monster to Hell in a Cell, but nothing prepared me for maggot top. When I suddenly have a heart attack before finishing my client's cut. One time I was doing clipper over comb to blend a client's haircut and I sneezed unexpectedly. I made a hole on the side of his head. I turned him around and tried to blend it in the best I could, but the damage was done. My aunt was a barber in the 70s. One day during her shift a man came in and asked for a trim during the cut he just offed himself. My aunt got a bit of brain in her mouth. Not the barber in this story. My younger sister was. This story happened about 38 years ago, so I'm recalling as best as I can remember. Among our friends group was a very sweet young man who we called Bubba. A little heavy and not the sharpest tool in the shed, but a sweet, good-hearted guy. Bubba's hair hung in his face, which drove Sissy nuts. We should note that he had a huge crush on Sissy. One evening we were sitting around my parents' dining room table playing spades. That's a card game. As always, Bubba's hair was hanging over his eyes. Sissy was practically twitching watching him brushing it away every 30 seconds. Finally, she spoke up and said, "Bubba, you need a haircut. Let me just trim your bangs." Of course he immediately agreed. Scissors and a towel were quickly tracked down and Sissy started clipping. It was uneven and kinda patchy. "This isn't going well." One of Genius' friends spoke up and said, "It ain't even. But I got an idea. Don't trim any more for a minute." Dude pulls my mom's biscuit mixing bowl out of the cupboard and plonks it on poor Bubba's head. "There. Just cut straight across." And she did. Then cut straight across the back. The oh shit moment happened when Sissy took the bowl off Bubba's head and we realized she had given poor Bubba a literal bowl cut. He looked like the Dutch boy paint kid's pothead cousin. When I was a kid, the hairdresser nicked my brother's ear and it bled a bit. I'm pretty sure that was an oh shit moment for her. My brother didn't even care.